Chapter 10. The Mechanic's Work. The work settled into a rhythm across the first 3 days. Rowan filed the block of steel during the before-window hours. When the hangar was quiet and the dim light from Marcus's oil lamp was sufficient for the coarse shaping, the file moved in long, even strokes, the steady shrp of steel on steel marking time, each pass guided by the caliper. The block was becoming a housing, slowly, in fractions of millimeters. Marcus worked nearby. He maintained the 2 operational helionauts knowing what could fail at altitude. He checked cable tension with a spring gauge, the cable producing a low hum when he pulled it taut. He cleaned and repacked the oxygen cylinders, the valves clicking into their seats. He inspected every surface and tested every connection, doing the same checks he had done the day before. And the day before that. They worked in parallel. The hangar held the rhythmic rasp of Rowan's file, the occasional hum of Marcus's cable tests, the clink of tools set down and picked up, and beneath it all the thin, steady wind through the open sides. "I trained as an aerospace engineer," Marcus said on the second morning, testing a cable splice by applying lateral load. The cable sang a single low note under tension. PhD program at Michigan, atmospheric re-entry vehicles, how to bring things through the atmosphere safely. He pulled the cable taut, examined the splice point, nodded. "Now I send things up through it instead." 30 years, Rowan said. He did not look up from his work. The file was finding a hard spot in the steel, a grain irregularity that resisted the cut. He adjusted his angle and applied more pressure. The hard spot gave way after 3 more strokes. He set the file down and ran his thumb across the surface, feeling for irregularities he could not see in the lamp's weak light. The metal beneath his thumb was cool, and even the faintest crosshatch of file marks showing where he had worked. He took the caliper measurement and noted 0.3 millimeters over target on this face, which was within tolerance. He marked the next pass with chalk and resumed. 30 years of keeping 3 platforms functional with no spare parts and no manufacturing base, Marcus said. He set down the cable and crossed to where Rowan worked, watching the file move for several strokes. "You treat the machine like it is alive. Everything mechanical has preferences," Rowan said. "You learn them, or they break." "Yes." Marcus crouched beside him. "That is exactly right, and most people do not understand it. They think machines are tolerant, and they think metal does not care, but metal cares very much. It cares about stress direction and grain alignment and the temperature at which you work it. You already know this." "My father's solar collector taught me," Rowan said. "The tracking mechanism had a bearing that seated properly in cool weather and bound in warmth. I had to learn that the housing expanded differently than the bearing race when the temperature changed." "Thermal differential expansion," Marcus said, stopping what he was doing. "Your father must have been a remarkable man. He studied literature. He became an engineer because the world required it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He stood, walked back to the cable splice, and resumed his work. A minute later he stopped. He had pulled the cable taut and let it go, the way he had all morning. But this time the note was wrong. The cable's hum had a smaller hum inside it, faint, a frequency that should not be there. He pulled the cable again, and the smaller hum returned. He set the spring gauge down and walked the length of the cable, running his hand along it, until he found the place where the second hum was loudest. A single strand of the inner braid had come loose where the splice met the core. He worked at it with a pick, drawing the strand back into place until the cable's hum came clean. Rowan watched without stopping his filing. A failing splice meant a broken cable, and a broken cable at altitude meant 3 people in the clouds with nothing under them. When the cable was right, Marcus walked back to the next inspection point. Pip came and went. She arrived each day around mid-morning with food she had traded for in the lower levels. setting it on the workbench because she had learned that neither Rowan nor Marcus would stop working to eat unless the food was placed directly in their path. She brought dried mushrooms, ghost cap broth in a sealed clay cup, and once a piece of the dried apple Rowan had tasted at the market, set on top of his work where he could not miss it. "You forgot to eat yesterday," Pip said, watching him take the apple. "Both of you." Marcus had 2 cups of water and a handful of dried crickets, and you had nothing at all. I was at a critical stage in the filing. Pip rolled her eyes. "You're always at a critical stage. Eat the apple." He ate it. The sweetness cut through the metallic taste that had been collecting in his mouth from hours of steel dust. Pip brought news along with food. Market prices were shifting because a new trader had arrived from the northern settlements with a cartload of salvaged copper. A water filtration crew was looking for someone to repair a valve mechanism. And there was a rumor that the Kettle Fork settlement had found a cache of sealed medicines in a collapsed hospital. Rowan noted that last one with professional interest and dismissed it, since his antibiotics were already secured and Okoye would release them when the work was done. She brought small Meridian gossip too. A council member's daughter had married a guard from the 3rd level. The water filtration crew had finally identified the source of a months-long algae bloom in the secondary reservoir, and someone had attempted to scale the wall from outside again before being turned back by the guards. Rowan listened with half his attention, which was the attention level Pip expected, and she kept talking until she had emptied her store of news. Pip also served as translator between Rowan and the city he inhabited but did not understand the painted lines, the credit system, the social protocols of a place where everything got argued out. When Rowan needed a finer file than his multi-tool provided, Pip knew which metalworker on the 3rd level would lend one in exchange for future flashlight repair. When Marcus needed a particular adhesive for a cable splice, Pip located a chemist in the lower levels who made it from resin. Pip and Marcus already knew each other. He called her Miss Shen, and she called him the professor, and what had started as transactions years ago had become familiar. Rowan watched them talk for a moment, then went back to his filing. On the 4th evening, Marcus brought out the observation logs. They sat in the hangar doorway as the dim closed over Meridian, the oil lamp casting a warm circle on the concrete between them. Marcus opened a leather-bound notebook filled with hand-drawn sketches, measurements, and notes written in a small, precise hand that was nothing like his speaking voice. The notebook had been used hard, the leather worn through at the corners, the spine cracked from years of opening. "Every ascent, we record what we see," Marcus said. He turned to a page of sketches. The flums, their positions relative to the platform, their movement patterns, their size when we can estimate it, their feeding behavior when visible. He pointed to a drawing of an oblong shape, translucent, with internal structures suggested by dotted lines. "This one we have observed 11 times, always in the same sector of the cloud layer, approximately 200 meters above the cloud surface. We think it is the same individual, based on a triangular marking on the forward membrane." Rowan studied the sketch. The flume had been drawn carefully, the proportions consistent across multiple drawings, the dotted lines suggesting organs or chambers. Beside the sketches were columns of numbers, estimated length, width, altitude, direction of movement, duration of observation. Each entry was dated, each measurement annotated with cloud density and wind direction and light level. Marcus had been collecting data for years. He worked alone, with instruments made from salvage, and nobody else could verify what he saw. "How large?" Rowan asked. "The one we call the resident is approximately 40 meters. Others we have observed range from perhaps 30 to what we estimate at 90. The largest are difficult to measure because they do not surface fully, so we see parts of them and extrapolate." He turned to another page. This one showed waveforms, hand-drawn, the peaks and troughs carefully spaced. "These are the chorus, recorded as best we can by ear and stopwatch. The frequency patterns repeat, but not exactly, and each cycle introduces small variations. The harmonic structure is consistent across observations, but the specific frequencies shift. Rowan looked at the waveforms. The patterns resembled a passage he had read in his physics textbook on resonance in biological systems. Resonance patterns in biological systems often suggest complex communication, Rowan said. He was quoting, approximately from a chapter on bioacoustics. The variations you describe, the harmonic structure with shifting frequencies, the textbook associates those characteristics with communication in marine mammals. Marcus stopped turning pages and looked at Rowan. Where did you read that? A college-level physics textbook. I do not fully understand the mathematics, but the description matches what I hear in the chorus. Marcus set the notebook down and looked at the sky. You are describing echolocation. Whales did that in harmonic patterns with frequency variations that carried information. He turned back to Rowan. I am an aerospace engineer. My training is in materials and structures and fluid dynamics. Acoustics is not my field, and I have spent years recording these patterns without the vocabulary to describe what I was hearing. He picked up the notebook and opened it to a blank page. Tell me what else your textbook says about resonance in biological systems. Rowan told him what he could remember, fragments and half-understood passages and terminology without the supporting mathematics. Marcus listened closely, then asked Rowan about frequency ranges, about harmonic intervals, about what the textbook said happened when communication patterns broke down across distance. Rowan answered what he could, and the terminology came back to him in pieces: bioluminescence in deep-water species, signal degradation across long distances, call and response patterns the textbook had identified in marine communication. He did not remember the mathematics behind any of it, only the descriptions. Marcus wrote notes, asked more questions, made connections Rowan could not, linking the bioacoustics descriptions to observations he had made above the clouds, but had not known how to interpret. On the 5th day, Rowan completed the bore of the housing. On the 6th day, he began the precision fitting, seating the bearings by hand, checking alignment with the caliper, adjusting with file strokes so fine they produced dust rather than curls. He thought of his mother twice during the work. Once when he caught himself filing past the dinner hour, and once when the chorus began at the edge of his hearing. She had been waiting more than a week. Okoye had said the antibiotics would keep, but no one had said the same about his mother. And he filed faster after that. Marcus understood the kind of work this required and kept quiet, leaving food and water where Rowan would find them. That evening, Rowan lowered the first bearing into the housing. The bearing was small in his palm, denser than its size suggested, machined in a pre-Opeking factory by people long dead. He had cleaned it that morning with solvent and a lint-free cloth, and it had come up clean and bright, the steel showing the slight rainbow tint that meant it had been heat-treated. He aligned it with the housing bore and turned it with his fingers, feeling for the catch or scrape that would mean the bore was too wide. It dragged on the second rotation, the bore too tight on one side. He removed the bearing and examined the housing with the caliper, finding the high spot at 0.1 millimeter, maybe less. He marked it with chalk and went back to the file, working the surface in short, careful strokes, the dust finer now than it had been all week. Marcus had not spoken. He had moved closer when the bearing dragged, 2 paces away now instead of 3, and he stayed there while Rowan worked. Rowan cleaned the bore again, ran a soft cloth through it, blew out what the cloth missed. He lowered the bearing in for the second time, aligned it, and turned it with his fingers. The bearing turned smooth, the inner race spinning freely against the housing wall with no catch and no scrape. It made the clean sound his father's solar collector had made when the tracking bearing was seated true. Marcus had been watching, very still, and he exhaled when the bearing turned. How does it feel? Rowan tested the bearing once more, fingers on the inner race. True. with the first bearing seated and the alignment within tolerance. Rowan sat on the edge of the helionaut platform and looked up through the open hangar at the sky. The platform's aluminum deck was cool under him, and somewhere in the structure he could feel the faint hum of the cable tensioners. The clouds were the same as always, gray and close and featureless from below. He knew now that they were not featureless. They were layered, stratified. A landscape of density and wind and moisture where creatures sang and fed and moved in pods through the atmosphere. The chorus began, faint at this altitude, filtered through the distance between the cloud layer and the top of Meridian. Rowan felt it before his ears registered it. The low vibration arriving through the platform's aluminum frame and into his hands where they rested on the deck. Okoye would release the antibiotics tomorrow, when the second bearing was seated and the mechanism tested. 3 days back to the mountain. The plan was the same as it had been when he arrived, and the chorus swelled through the platform and into his hands, and the plan did not feel like enough anymore.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.